Let me start plainly. If you think the world still revolves around Washington and Wall Street, you are living in yesterday. The ground has shifted under our feet, and pretending otherwise won't stop the slide. Power has moved, production has moved, leverage has moved, and the refusal to face that fact is not strategy, it's denial. Here is the simple truth: governments and global corporations alike are rewriting their playbooks because the center of gravity in the world economy no longer sits comfortably inside the United States and Western Europe. You can add Canada and Japan if you like. The point stands. A different engine is driving global development now. You won't reverse that trend with speeches, sanctions, or slogans. The British Empire couldn't stop a rising United States, no matter how many times it tried. 1776, 1812, even diplomatic flirtations with the Confederacy. They resisted. Then they conceded reality. That is how history works. Resentment is not a policy. Today, we are watching the same drama with different actors. Successive American leaders have insisted they can hold China back. They don't want it to flourish. They say it loudly. They legislate it proudly. And yet the outcome keeps repeating itself. It doesn't work. It never has. Ask yourself, what does it mean when a nation's central project becomes not to build the future, but to prevent someone else from building theirs? Is that a path to renewal or a confession of drift? Let's lay bare a discomforting fact. The United States is the world's largest debtor, and among the top creditors to whom we pay interest is the People's Republic of China. Consider what interest means. It is money you and I send to Washington, that Washington then sends on to Beijing. We do not use those dollars for schools, hospitals, public transit, or student aid. They help build someone else's bridges, someone else's labs, someone else's capacity. If that surprises you, it is because a culture soaked in advertising has trained us to hear only the flattering half of any story. We are sold comfort. We are not invited to examine contradiction. Sanctions are another example of this selective hearing. We are told again and again that sanctions work. They punish adversaries, discipline rivals, and demonstrate resolve. But sanctioning is not magic. It is a problem like any other, and businesses, states, and people solve problems for a living. They reroute, they disguise, they adapt. Oil moves through third countries, cargoes are relabeled, extra layers are added to a shipment, so one kind of good hides another. It isn't neat. It isn't free. It is persistent. A half century embargo on Cuba did not overthrow its government. Did it sting? Yes. Did it succeed in its stated goal? No. And now Cuba finds itself aligning with new blocs precisely because decades of pressure taught it to look elsewhere. There is a pattern here, and it is not the pattern our slogans claim. And then there is China, the most sanctioned, isolated, and blocked nation of the post 1945 era, because it dared to have a successful communist revolution. For decades after 1949, Washington tried to pretend China wasn't there. No recognition until the 1970s. No normal trade. No easy financing. And what happened? The attempt to seal China off ended up forcing it inward, compelling it to develop on its own terms. If the goal was to prevent a serious competitor, the result was the opposite: the most formidable economic rival the United States has ever faced. In sector after sector, artificial intelligence, electric vehicles, advanced manufacturing, where the United States remains ahead, one must add a single word: yet. This is the larger frame in which to understand the specific headline that keeps surfacing. China is willing and able to squeeze flows of critical inputs, rare earths, specialized metals, advanced components on which the United States military machine depends. The most expensive armed forces in human history are entangled in supply chains they do not control. Think about that. Deterrence presumes capability on demand. Capability presumes parts on time. And parts today often presume a green light from the very country our political class insists must be contained. That is a contradiction, and contradictions have consequences. How did we get here? We chose it. Over roughly 40 years, corporate America made a calculation that was personally rational and nationally reckless. It chased cheaper labor, weaker regulations, and higher return on equity. It closed factories in Detroit, Cleveland, and Allentown, and opened new ones in the Pearl River Delta. It waged and won a war against unions. It celebrated a fantasy that we could abandon production and still dominate the producers, do finance here, do tech here, do war here, and let others do the making. The profits were very real. The stock prices soared, the bonuses paid, but the bill has arrived. Now, when a missile needs a magnet, a jet needs a component, a radar needs a material refined in only a few places on Earth, we discover that just in time becomes not in time. We discover that cost efficiency becomes strategic fragility. We discover that military superiority assigned to budgets and bases means very little if the parts bin is controlled by someone else. This is not an abstraction. This is the real world interface of American power with a globalized supply chain built for shareholder value, not national resilience. Let's be honest about incentives. Defense contractors answer to investors. Investors want margins. Margins follow the lowest cost. Politicians, subsidized by those same interests, make the speeches that keep this arrangement afloat. The Pentagon can spend lavishly on weapon systems and still have no say over where the upstream inputs are mined, refined, or assembled. The private corporation decides that because the private corporation owns the decision rights, and the logic of profit, legal, normal, celebrated, pushes those decisions far from the people who will bear the strategic risk when the world heats up. Meanwhile, China pursued a different logic plan for the long term. Build capacity, guard inputs, subsidize strategically, accept that certain industries are national assets, not just profit centers. The result is not ideological poetry, it is practical leverage. When tensions rise, economic valves turn faster than aircraft carriers. Slowing a shipment can matter more than launching a ship. In a world woven together by supply, control over production is itself a weapon, quiet, precise, denied in public, decisive in practice. And this brings us to the lesson too many would prefer not to learn. You cannot wage economic war indefinitely and expect the other side to simply absorb it. Sanctions teach workarounds. Tariffs teach substitution. Block lists teach self reliance. Every attempt to punish pushes the target to build an alternative. Over time, those alternatives stop being makeshift. They become structures, new trade routes, new currencies for settlement, new alliances of convenience that through repetition harden into habit. You wanted compliance. You built competition. At home, the same logic has been eating away at sovereignty. Deindustrialization was not an accidental byproduct, it was the plan. It delivered precisely what it promised for the few and withheld for the many: soaring corporate profits, shrinking bargaining power, and communities left with memories of work and no work to do. We told ourselves we would become post industrial. We told displaced workers They would be retrained for the jobs of the future. What we produced instead was an economy that could design almost anything and make far too little of it. An empire of PowerPoints resting on factories we no longer own. Does this matter only in peacetime? No. It matters most in crisis. A society that has abandoned the capacity to make what it needs has abandoned the capacity to decide its fate. The word for that is not efficiency. The word for that is dependency. And dependency is the opposite of strength. Let's widen the camera. Empires do not go gently. They don't wake up, read the tea leaves, and choose humility. They dig in. They insist one more show of force will reverse decline. Rome, Britain, the Soviet Union. The pattern is familiar. The United States stands at the same junction. Will we keep trying to police oceans and dictate terms to everyone, everywhere? Or will we turn inward, meet the needs of our own people, and find a different kind of standing in the world? That is not a technical question. It is a moral and political choice. And notice who pays for the old answer: trillions for weapons, bases, and deployments. Meanwhile, at home, families skip doctor visits, juggle rents, and drown in tuition debt. The empire demands sacrifice, and it always finds the same givers: the working class. The global games pay dividends to a narrow elite. The costs are socialized. The applause is private. Now consider the front where the 21st century is being fought most effectively. Not battlefields, but balance sheets. Not landings, but loans. Not bombs, but bridges. China's reach into Latin America, Africa, and Asia has not been led by fleets. It has been led by contracts, ports, railways, power grids, oil agreements, telecoms. The method is simple. Embed yourself in the arteries of daily life. If you build it, maintain it, and finance it, you will be necessary tomorrow. That is a different kind of power. Less dramatic on television, more durable in reality. Contrast that with the legacy of coups, sanctions, and interventions. You can overawe a country for a season. You cannot build trust with a boot. People remember who repairs their roads and who blows up their substations. They remember who brings a lifeline and who tightens a noose. The world is not naive. It is practical. It will increasingly choose the partner that helps people work, eat, and live. In that world, being the best at destruction is a strange foundation for influence. And here is the human core of all of this. Sanctions do not visit their pain on the insulated. They visit it on the exposed. The worker, the shopkeeper, the parent at the pharmacy. Bombs do not fall on boardrooms. They fall on neighborhoods. We can argue over the intentions of policymakers. We cannot argue over the results. The burden is carried by those who never voted to carry it. If ordinary people pay the price, ordinary people must claim the authority to refuse the bill. That, too, is a lesson of history, which brings us back to the myth that blinds us, that great power rivalry is destiny, that collisions are unavoidable, that your voice and mine are irrelevant to the arc of events. That myth is useful to those who profit from the machinery of conflict. It is fatal to everyone else. Nothing in this rivalry is foreordained. There is still a choice between escalation and accommodation, between militarized theater and economic common sense, between a future of permanent emergency and a future of sober rebuilding. What would sober rebuilding look like? It begins by naming the real wound. Yes, China is willing to squeeze exports to defend its interests, but the deeper injury is self-inflicted. We designed an economy that split profit from purpose and then acted shocked when profit dragged purpose across an ocean. We told ourselves the market would handle everything. The market did exactly what it was built to do: maximize return, minimize cost, externalize risk. It was our job, through public institutions and democratic planning, to prevent those private calculations from shredding the public interest. We failed at that job. Reversal requires more than a speech. It requires rebuilding the capacity we gave away and democratizing the power that gave it away. Worker control where it is absent. Public investment where private fear of lower margins blocks essential production. Secure supplies for essential industries. A foreign policy that starts from cooperation, not from the ritual of threat, and an honest accounting of the trade offs. If you want resilience, you pay for redundancy. If you want sovereignty, you invest in making things again. If you want peace, you stop confusing endless deployments with security. Will that be easy? No. Will it be quick? No. But the alternative is to continue boasting about dominance while waiting for the next missing part to halt the engine. That is not strategy. That is a countdown. Let me tie the threads. The world we inhabit has outgrown the illusions we inherited. We cannot spend our way back to uncontested supremacy. We cannot sanction our way to compliance. We cannot propagandize our way past arithmetic. A nation that wants to lead must first produce, educate, and care. It must tell its people the truth about debts and dependencies. It must organize its economy to serve human need before it serves quarterly reports. It must measure greatness by what it builds, not only by what it can blow up. So here is the point. This is not a story about China alone, or rare earths alone, or Venezuela alone. It is a story about a system that has confused financial elegance with economic strength, military reach with security, and advertising with truth. If we keep that confusion, we will keep learning the same lesson the hard way. If we drop it, we can rebuild on sturdier ground. I will end with a question I hope echoes after the video ends. When the next crisis comes, do you want to depend on a supply chain you do not control, on creditors you cannot persuade, and on slogans that do not match reality? Or do you want an economy that can stand on its own feet, a politics that trusts its own people, and a foreign policy that recognizes that in a world this interconnected, cooperation is not charity, it is common sense? We have been warned by history. We have been reminded by headlines. We have been billed by our own choices. The bill is high. Paying it without changing course would be madness. Let's change course, because unless we do, this won't be the last time the United States discovers that the tools of its power have someone else's fingerprints on them. It will be the template, and it will repeat with rising cost until we either accept decline as fate or replace denial with discipline. The former is easy. The latter is necessary. You know where I stand.